Hello Year 9. This video will help you with tasks 2.36 and 2.37 in your medicine workbook. In these activities, you're going to be looking at how public health improved in the 19th century. So find your workbook and then when you're ready, hit play. Now in your workbook, you have a copy of this timeline and it shows all the major improvements in public health made in Britain in the 19th century. Now, as you know, before 1840, very little was done to try and improve conditions in British towns. But after 1840, that began to change. The old idea of laissez-faire came to an end, and people began to accept that the government had an important role to play in keeping people clean and healthy. And so Parliament began to take more action to improve public health, most importantly by passing laws to try and improve conditions. Now, I'm particularly interested in the period from 1860 onwards, because this is when public health really begins to improve quickly. So we're going to pay some special attention to that. You're ready now for the first part of task 2.36. Firstly, I want you to find what public health improvements were made in these years. And there are 4 years for you to look at, so find them on your timeline and take a look at them. And I want you to decide which of those improvements was the most important, and you're going to say why. Now you need to pause the video now and do that, and then hit play when you're ready to move forward. Okay, so let's have a little look at those health improvements. The first one in 1848 was the first Public Health Act. Now this was a law passed by Parliament which encouraged towns to improve sanitation, for example, by improving water supplies. Now the key word here is encouraged. This law was voluntary, not compulsory. In other words, towns were encouraged to improve sanitation, but they were not forced to improve sanitation, and so many of them chose not to. So this piece of law didn't have a major impact. Its impact was very limited. The next one, 1858, in that year, the government finally agreed to build a new and improved sewer system for London. Now there's a limitation here as well. This new sewer system only benefited people who lived in London. It didn't really improve conditions for other people in other parts of the country. The next one, 1875, is the really big one. In that year, Parliament passed a second important public health law. It was called the Public Health Act, and this time it forced towns to improve their sanitation. And the key word here is forced. This piece of law was compulsory, not voluntary. So towns had to improve sanitation, even if they didn't want to. They had no choice. So this piece of law was incredibly important. It has a major impact because after it is passed, every single town in Britain has to start cleaning up its act and providing fresh water supplies. So our last public health improvement in the 1880s and 1890s is this. Local councils began to build sanitation systems and they began to clear away some of the really dirty, unhealthy slum housing. Now, when we're thinking about this improvement, we have to remember that what the councils were doing here was based on the 1875 Public Health Act. It's the 1875 Public Health Act that forced towns to make these improvements. So maybe you need to check your answer to question 2, which of these improvements was the most important, and you might want to change your mind about it. When you're ready, hit play. Now we're going to focus in on this part of the timeline, so the bit before 1860. And I want you to read this part of the timeline and try and find 3 reasons why improvements here were slow, or reasons why there was very little improvement in sanitation before 1860. And you need to pause the video and do that, and then when you're done, hit play. So let's look at what you could have found. Here's one reason. Scientists in this part of the 19th century didn't really understand the link between dirty water and disease, so they didn't see a need to clean up the water supplies. The second reason tucked away in here is that taxpayers, or ratepayers as they're referred to here, they did not want to pay for the cost of improvements to sanitation. There's another reason here too. Local businessmen and local politicians did not accept Parliament forcing them to improve sanitation, so Parliament was reluctant to actually step in and make them do something about conditions. And there's one more reason here too, look. Although Parliament did pass the 1848 Public Health Act, it was voluntary, not compulsory, so a lot of councils just ignored it. Okay, so the next step of the task is this. I want you to find some examples of 4 factors helping developments in public health. So the 4 that you're looking for are science, politics, technology, and individuals, so important people. And I want you to look out for examples of where did these factors help to improve public health. Now you're going to summarise just in a sentence, and you're going to try and use the phrase, "this mattered because." So I'm going to give you an example here to get you going, and I'm going to give you an example of science. In 1861, Pasteur did his germ theory, and in the 1870s, Koch did his research on germs. So 2 really important pieces of scientific research. And that research proved that microbes cause disease. This mattered because it made people more willing to pay for improvements to towns once they understood how important those improvements were. So that's my example, and your job is to find some examples of the other factors at work. And I'm not going to leave you totally on your own to do this. I'm going to give you some clues about where to look on your timeline. So you might want to pause the video now and use those to help you do your sentence summaries. When you're ready, hit play. So now we're ready for our final task. We've mentioned today already the 1875 Public Health Act, which was the really important public health improvement in the 19th century. So we need to know this one like the back of our hands, and we need to know what was in this piece of law. So to try and make it stick, we are going to draw quick sketches for each of the major parts of this law. So you can see you've got 6 that I want you to illustrate just quickly in a sketch to try and make it memorable. The first one is towns had to provide clean water. So my sketch for that is, look, I've got a clean water drop and I've got a dirty water drop, and that's going to help me remember that. So spend 2 minutes now where you do your sketches. And when you've done that, your homework is complete. Well done, Year 9, and I'll see you next lesson.